I was a criminal for quite some time growing up. I grew up in an area where I was surrounded by it. There was a lot of other people that were criminals as well. I lived in a neighborhood that was, people looked up to being a gangster or being a bikie or whatever in the areas that I grew up in. But in saying that, like my family and my mum did everything they could to mask me and shield me from that, to not go that way. I was always a rebellious child. I always went against the system. I always wanted to find my own way and figure things out on my own terms. So if you told me I couldn't do something, I'd do everything in my power to do that. Thankfully, I grew up, but this is the whole kind of scenario and story about this whole thing. So I grew up in South Auckland, New Zealand for most of my life. We moved around quite a bit growing up as well. I grew up with a single mother. She had a boyfriend at some stage throughout that whole period, but obviously that fell through. And yeah, so majority of the time I was raised by a single mother in South Auckland, New Zealand. These are the places that aren't the nicest places. They're not the place you would go if you're trying to visit Auckland or whatever. You'd try to avoid these places. But it made me who I am today, and it was good growing up in those areas and understanding. And I definitely didn't grow up the worst. There was boys down the street that grew up way worse than me, that had it way rougher than me, that went down the wrong paths and all of that. But it obviously wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. So yeah, grew up with a single mother in South Auckland, and I was a very troubled kid. I had ADHD like crazy. I was just mental, you couldn't keep me still. I was running around everywhere. I'd do everything I can to piss anyone off. I just went against the system any way I could. And I got kicked out of 5 schools growing up. The only school I didn't get kicked out of was primary school. And I did crazy shit in primary school. I tried to set school on fire. I pissed on a girl that was climbing up a tree. I did just fucking can't even, there's so many bloody stories, it's not even funny. And that was the only school I didn't get kicked out of. And I probably should have gotten kicked out of, but thankfully I didn't. And I actually really enjoyed that school. It was a great school. The teachers and everyone was amazing. There was a few teachers that I had beef with. Beefing with kids when you're a teacher is crazy, by the way. That's crazy. That's so funny to me. From there, it just went downhill. I got kicked out of 2 intermediates, 3 high schools. I only made it to like year 10, start of year 11, and then I dropped out. So yeah, 2 intermediates, which is year 7 and 8. So just after primary school, 2 intermediates, and then obviously moved over to high school, and high school got kicked out of 3. I moved in with my dad when I was like 13, 14. I had enough of living with my mum. And living with my dad wasn't the greatest idea, honestly. We lived in abandoned buildings, bro. We literally lived in abandoned buildings. So my mum was amazing. She done very well with property and she was stable, She had a decent income. We didn't have everything we wanted, but we had the minimum and we had what we needed, I was forever grateful for that. Like, we always had what we needed. I just remember when I was going to school, she'd always pack my lunch, and I stopped bringing my lunch to school because a lot of other kids never had lunch. A lot of other kids wouldn't come to school with lunch and things like that, and I was always sharing my food with other people. So I felt like the odd one out, and I just wouldn't bring my lunch in. But my mum always packed my lunch. She was always a great mother. She always made sure that I was fed. I just really didn't want to eat. And a lot of kids that I went to school with didn't have those sorts of luxuries growing up as well. Not saying we had, all the fanciest and greatest food. We just had what we needed. I appreciate that, and I thank my mum for that. Going into intermediate and high school and all of these sorts of things, I got into a lot of shit growing up, I was robbing and stealing, and that's when it started, was at school. I started robbing. I started taking from people that I knew, my own friends. Then I started going to shops, started stealing from shops, and eventually it led into like dealing drugs. Taking drugs. I started smoking weed when I was 13. So 13, I started smoking weed and it became regular, before school. And this is middle school, intermediate. This is like, I'm only 12 years old, 13 years old. Started smoking weed with the boys before school in a can. And then eventually I had enough. Me and my mum, we were just at each other's throat. We couldn't live with each other. I was so naughty. I was walking all over her. I just had no respect for my mother. Having a single mum, and she would discipline me, but it wasn't like a father's discipline. It wasn't like you're going to get smacked or you're fearful, I don't know if that would have helped, because even when I went to go live with my dad, I didn't give a fuck. I was just I did whatever I wanted. When I was 15, when I was around 13, 14, I was like, "No, I'm done with you, mum. I want to go live with my dad." And I went to live with my dad in another town called Wellington, and we lived in abandoned buildings. Literally, we lived in abandoned buildings. Yeah, it was crazy. These are all earthquake-prone buildings, so all of these buildings got hit by earthquakes. So we lived in them, and my dad worked for a construction company at the time that had all of these buildings. Yeah, these buildings were like just out the gate. They were not the nicest buildings to be living in, to be honest. And we ate the bare minimum. Like, dad didn't really like cooking. Dad just had the basics. Well, he didn't have much money, to be honest. Dad didn't have much money, and he was on drugs, and he was on, drank a lot of alcohol, smokes as well. So all of that money kind of went in towards that, not really food. So this is where I started getting real curious with the world, and I started exploring more and going out and figuring out how to make money on my own terms. And I started getting into dealing. I started buying bulk weed, and I started skipping school a lot more as well. And my dad just wouldn't, dad would try and tell me to go to school and do all of these things, but I just kind of did whatever the fuck I wanted, to be honest. I did whatever I wanted. And I got kicked out of that school, sent to a naughty boys school, and I started smoking a lot more weed and dealing a lot more. And this is where I started becoming an actual criminal, as I started stealing from stores, stealing from people, robbing people, and even just fighting people for no reason, like going through the city and just punching someone for no reason. I was just a feral child. I didn't understand that what I was doing was just the worst type of person. I was influenced by all these other older fellas that were in these areas, and I tried to be tough and I tried to scrap everyone that I could to show that I was ruthless. I didn't care. At school, I was in trouble. On the streets, I was in trouble, and I would go lurking at night, in the AM all the way up until the morning. I'd do all this stupid stuff, and I had a lot of good friends, you know what I mean? And I kind of ruined all of those friendships. People's parents were told about me not to hang out with me. I was a naughty kid, that they shouldn't even mess with me. So a lot of kids just kind of didn't want to hang out with me at all. And a lot of kids were told that I was a naughty kid and that you shouldn't hang out with me. And that's all good. I learned over time that the more you try to become a criminal and a dealer and all of these sorts of things, people aren't going to want to hang out with you, And I went to good schools. Like, I went to decent schools. I wouldn't say they were the best schools, but they were all right, St. Pat's Town was like a Catholic school. It was a good school to get into. My dad went there. My other family members went there. And, my family tried to step in and make sure that my dad was looking after me. But obviously, I did whatever I wanted. I was naughty. I got in trouble with police a lot. There was a few instances where I actually got accused of things that I never did. I got accused of some pretty messed up stuff. And that took me down a rabbit hole as well, where I just didn't trust anyone. And I thought my family weren't there to look after me. My sister turned on me. I have a sister, but we're not close at all. I didn't even talk to her. She threw me under the bus. Like, I was just in a shit spot, and I was a naughty kid, everything that I'm saying right now was because of me, because I was getting myself in these stupid situations and I was blaming the world for all of it. But I was the one being a drug abuser, and I started this young, like 13 onwards, and then my family had nothing to do with this. They didn't know I was doing it. I went and found this shit on my own. I went and hung out with the big boys on my own, and I started getting onto harder stuff. When I was around 15, 16, I decided, I'm done with my dad. I want to go fucking explore another city. So I went back and lived with my mum, and me and my mum lived together. I went back up there to Auckland, and I tried to go to school there. And this is where I started getting on MD and coke and all of these other drugs, and I started slanging them as well, started distributing, met a lot more higher profiles, and as soon as I started getting kicked out of school again, I decided to go to work. Thankfully, and this is a big thankfully, I got a job with my best mates, one of my best friends, old man, and he had a crane company. And that company introduced me into a lot of messed up stuff, but it also saved my life. Like, it also, later on in life, I decided to utilize my career as a stepping stone to come over to Australia and work in the FIFO industry, and it absolutely changed my life. So in essence, like, that job messed me up, but it also saved my life. So yeah, when I was around 15, I got kicked out of school. The fifth school, I was over it. I was done. Managed to get a job the next day, which was awesome. And I worked with a lot of older people. So I started drinking, I started doing drugs, and on another level. I started doing it the same amount as all these older boys. And I was only 15, 16. And I was in the trades in New Zealand for like 5 years. And I worked with bikies, and I looked up to these fellas, and I wanted to be like them. And I just started going down a much worse path. I started, burglaries, fucking robbing people, same stuff, and dealing drugs, and even getting to other stuff as well that I don't really want to talk about. It got really bad. For years, I was a criminal. For like at least three years. I was still going to work. I was still paying the bills, I was helping my mum pay the bills. Mum kicked me out of home when I was like 15, 16. We had enough. Me and my mum had enough of each other. I decided to move out. I lived in the city for like 6 months, even less than that. Lived in the city, and I lived with this guy that just came out of prison. Me and him, we used to do some messed up stuff, bro. I even got even deeper into this rabbit hole of wanting to become a criminal, and I thought it was mean. I thought it was cool. I thought it was cool to be a criminal, take drugs and deal and all of these sorts of things. And for years, I was just stuck in that rut where I just didn't know anything else. I didn't see the other side to it, and I started getting fat and slow, unfit. I was a very fit person growing up. I did a lot of sports. I really loved my job. That was the one thing that I stuck with, and I'm really grateful for that. I was thankful to have a trade like the cranes and work with. I was able to stick in that role, and it was amazing. It was really good, and stuck with it, thankfully for that. So that was a great job, and it really saved my life. And when I turned around 18, 19, I started to realize that, holy, this is not the life I want. I don't enjoy this anymore. I don't enjoy taking drugs. I'm depressed. I'm not where I want to be in life. I just feel like a piece of shit, really, to be honest. I decided that I wanted to change. I wanted to get out of here. And I did cranes for 5 years, and I had no money to show for it. I bought all of the nicest things, I lived a nice lifestyle, and I partied, and I did all of these things, and made a lot of extra money on the side. I just knew that it was going to lead to a bad place in life. I was either going to become a criminal. I was thinking of being a gang member. I was like on the edge of being a gang member where I wanted to become a bikie. I was inspired to become a bikie. You don't just become one. You work your way towards it. And I was starting to get on this road where I wanted to work towards that. That's my next step. That's where I wanted to go. And I thankfully pulled off that route, and I got introduced to crypto and all of these online making money and all of that stuff. And I was just really inspired by that and the people that I met online. So thankfully, I stayed with a good job for 5 years, and I got introduced to making money online, crypto and all of those sorts of things. And then I got taught about Australia, and FIFO over in Australia, and that's just fully changed everything. I was like, nah, that's me. Boom. Literally 1 week. Booked all my tickets, sold all my stuff, left. I was gone. I went to Australia. I'm so thankful I did that, man. Australia it was a blessing to be there, to be honest, and see the opportunity and work over there and have 5 years experience in the cranes already. And I pretty much fit in like a glove. I knew how to do my job. There was a lot of work over here. So that saved my life. Completely stopped doing drugs, completely stopped, being a criminal, because I just didn't know anyone over here. I had to make my own route. I had to be surrounded by my own people. And so I attracted different people. I attracted a different outcome of life as soon as I left my hometown, left all my friends, my family, everything I knew back home. And I was so much happier over here, so much happier. Occasionally go out for a drink and have some fun with my mates, but I barely ever go out. I barely ever do anything anymore. And I'm peaceful, I'm happy. I'm not a criminal anymore. I'm not a bad person. I don't treat people like shit. I'm good. I'm inspiring people. And that's the story of how I was a criminal for years. And I regret it, And I'm on to bigger and better things now, and I'm grateful for that. So yeah, take care.